Chang Jian at a Buddhist college behind the temple at Humpback Mountain. On a clear morning, I arrive at the old temple. The sun's first rays light the high treetops. A crooked path through dark places leads to the monks' hall, deep in flowering trees. This mountain view delights the birds. The creekside scene empties my heart. All sounds of life are stilled here, save for the chiming of the temple bell. So this is the second poem of Chang Jian in this anthology. You might remember that we saw another poem by him some time ago, in which he was visiting the mountain hermitage of another of the poets of the collection, Wang Changling. And that poem gave us a description with plenty of small detail on the surroundings and on the pleasant location of the retired life of his friend, and it expressed also the desire of retiring the world. Now this poem is pretty similar. We don't get in it an explicit declaration of a desire of abandoning the red dust of the world, but we get a description of the perfect locus for cleaning one's mind and for achieving illumination, samsara. So we get the recreation of the perfect place where one can, beyond the world, escape the world and escape the traps, the lies of wrong belief. Now, Chang Jian, I think we've already mentioned a few things when we talked about him back there. He's a high-tongue poet, not very productive. I think he has no more than 50, 60 poems left, but they are pretty versatile, although his forte, his specialty, was this type of poetry, which is also similar to the best of Wang Wei's poetry, this sort of dehumanized nature poetry in which a landscape, which is beautiful but also illuminating in a religious sense, is described with no explicit presence of human beings. So humans, like in a virtual reality or immersive computer game, humans are thrown into this world, but we get no visible signs of humans, especially of other humans. We just have a sort of disembodied gaze that is traveling, seeing the scenes, experiencing the sensations and the feelings. So Chang Jian didn't have a very successful career. He retired early from positions of power, and he specialized in this sort of topic. He became associated with this Taoistically inclined or Buddhist inclined poetry that sings of the pleasures of the retired life and of escaping the world. So the topic of this poem is, the explicit topic seems to be the description of a meditation hall. The title of this poem says, "At a Buddhist college behind the temple of Humpback Mountain." I think it's not clear where this Humpback Mountain temple was. In Chinese, this is Poshan. Other translators generally translate it as Broken Mountain Temple. And Buddhist college in the text, I think, refers to a pavilion for practicing Zen meditation. So Zen meditation, Chan in Chinese, is one of the schools of Buddhism which emphasizes the achievement of instantaneous illumination basically through meditation. Okay, so the topic of the poem, the apparent topic is, or the evident topic is a description of this pavilion for meditation, of this Chan pavilion inside a monastic complex. But more explicitly, the topic of the poem is illumination itself, how just being in this wonderful place, seeing the sights, hearing the sounds or the lack of sounds, creates a mind that is a proper recipient, that is adequately prepared for being illuminated. So this reminds me one of the topics of Eastern Buddhism. So one of the sects is the Pure Land sect. And the followers of the Pure Land sect do not believe in achieving illumination by yourself. They consider that that is too difficult. But they believe in offering oneself to the mercy of the Buddha Amida and the Bosatsu Avalokiteshvara, Wanjing in Chinese. And if you believe with faith in the Buddha Amida, you will be able to be reincarnated into the Pure Land of the West. And in that land, everything is disposed so that you will achieve illumination easily. So the birds sing sacred scripture, you have no pain or no physical suffering while you're there. And so this is in a way what is being recreated here, but not in another world, in this world. This Zen mountain retreat is the ideal place for achieving nirvana, or in any way for achieving a release from the bounds and chains of the material world. Okay, let's take a look at the poem as usual, couplet by couplet. On a clear morning, I arrive at the old temple. The sun's first rays light the high treetops. So the poem starts with an arrival. We might imagine that the poetic persona has been traveling, perhaps part of the night, perhaps he just got up very early, and he is visiting a temple. We know from the title that it is the Poshan Temple, the Hampak Mountain Temple. And it's an old one, the poem says, so a quaint scene, probably deep in the mountains. Just as the poet arrives at the temple, the sun is rising and it's illuminating the top of the trees. So this points us to two facts. First of all, we're in the middle of the mountain, so far away from human presence, except for the temple itself. Light seems to be illuminating just in the way that the temple helps to illuminate with its practice and its wisdom the minds and the spirit of the people who go to the temple. So light is pouring in from the top of the pines. Yeah, probably physical light from early morning sunshine, but also spiritual light from the heavens, the light of illumination. Next couplet. A crooked path through dark places leads to the monk's hall, deep in flowering trees. So if you've ever visited a mountain temple in China or in Japan, you probably know that that these structures are a composite of different buildings divided throughout the mountain. So they're not all piled up together. You have to keep traveling through the mountain to reach other pavilions, other structures, other temple compounds. So first you climb and you reach the gate, the entrance to the temple. Then there might be a couple of structures just beyond the main gateway, but then you have to walk around the mountain, and in another bend or following some winding path, you get to another pavilion, and following even other paths, you get to other pavilions. And I think that's what is being implied here. And again, I think we, just like in the first couplet, we have a literal, but also a metaphorical reading of this walking through. So a dark path, a crooked path. So it's not an easy path, the one that leads you into the monk's hall. Just as it is not an easy path, the one that leads you to truth, to illumination. It's a path full of effort, full of mortification, full of dead ends and byways. So on a literal sense, the poet is going through some dark path deep in the mountain towards the Zen pavilion inside this monastic complex, which is again deep in the forest, surrounded by flowering trees. And on the other hand, he is on a spiritual journey of the soul, you could say. And his physical presence at the mountain is just the last stage or the physical embodiment of a non-physical quest for illumination and truth through different difficulties. Now, some translators have believed that the crooked path leading to the temple was the path leading, what is described in this couplet is the path for getting to the temple itself, more than to the back of this Zen pavilion that would be included in the temple itself. But I think the interpretation that is made in this translation by Waters makes more sense, it's more consonant with the title. So the next couplet, we had in the first two couplets the arrival at the temple and the search for the Buddhist college, for the meditation, the Zen house, the meditation pavilion. So the second pair of couplets is going to describe us what we can see, what we can find once we have arrived in this area. But paradoxically, the pavilion itself is not described, but rather its surroundings. This mountain view delights the birds. The creek-side scene empties my heart. So the poet seems to have arrived to the Buddhist college. Probably we might imagine that in front of it or next to it there is a creek or a pond, and there are birds flying around, and there's a lovely mountain view from up here. So this mountain view delights the birds. Birds are surrounding the pavilion, and they're happy, they're singing, they're probably, ecstatic. And they contribute to the locus amoenus aspect of this place. But also the creekside scene empties my heart. Looking at the waters flowing or looking at the stilled waters of the lake empties the heart, subdues the passions. So this is very important in Buddhism. It's the idea that illumination is achieved by repressing desire, by eliminating desire, by quieting the passions. That is how one creates a mind that is ready for illumination. And when one has quieted the passions, one is like a transparent pond, like a river. One can see clearly, one can see transparently. So one achieves illumination. And the last couplet, if the third couplet showed us images, physical images of the birds singing, even though, that could be oral as well, but basically what we say is the birds are delighted, so you're seeing happy birds. And a creek scene, the last couplet focuses on the oral, but not on sounds, rather on the silence of most sounds. All sounds of life are stilled here, save for the chiming of the temple bell. So all the sounds of the world that might distract the seeker of truth, that might distract the seeker of illumination, all those sounds have been banished. This is a peaceful monastic spot. This perfect silence allows you to concentrate and meditate on what is really important. The only sound is the chiming of the temple bell. So that's the only sound in a Buddhist monastery, and the bells indicate the hours, but also call you to meditation. So it's a sound that contributes to your illumination, to your mental achieving of nirvana. So quite a successful poem. I think the poem does recreate very well an ideal place for illumination and the steps that a person would follow that would help him to achieve the appropriate state of mind. Now, interesting thing, this is a very popular poem. You can encounter it in many, many translations. Generally, if there is one translated poem of Chang Jian that you will find in an anthology, it will be this one. In fact, I even have a very bad Spanish anthology of Tang poetry, and it includes precisely this poem of Chang Jian as well. Now, most Chinese poems are very difficult to translate because, among other things, the classical language includes characters which have no indication of tense, of number, of person. Pronouns are seldom used in classical Chinese poetry. So there is such a big degree of ambiguity, and some characters can act depending on the interpretation you make of them. They can be nouns, they can be verbs, they can be adverbs. The classical language is very, very suggestive and very ambiguous. So there are many different ways of translating this poem, and there are many different translations that you will find, and it will be interesting to contrast them with this one. So, for example, a literal translation, character by character, of this poem would be something like this. Clear morning enter ancient temple, beginning sunshine high forest. Winding path leading to secluded place, Zen house flower tree deep. Mountain light enjoy please, bird nature, pool shadow empty human heart. 10,000 sound, there all quiet, only hear bell, inverted bell sound. So some of the critics who have commented on this poem, who have tried to interpret it, have, for example, put an emphasis on the contrast of heavenly and earthly images that appear on the poem. So there are heavenly images like the sun at the top of the trees, so that would be light above, a yang element, if you wish. And there's the shadows of the early morning, which would be down below. And the two energies, the Jing and the Jian, that is the heavenly and active and the earthly and passive, also appear in that third couplet of the poem. Well, the second and the third couplets, yeah? But basically in the third one. Mountain brightness delights the birds. Yeah, this mountain view delights the birds. And the creekside scene empties my heart. Marsh shadows empty human heart. So there is a contrast between the marsh and the mountain, the brightness and the shadows, the nature of the birds and the nature of mankind. Remember, heart also in Chinese doesn't just refer to affection, to feelings, as we would say in the West. It's also the seat of the mind, seating of consciousness. Yeah. So, for example, the translation of this couplet, this mountain view delights the birds, the creek side scene empties my heart. You know, it has been translated in many different ways. So here you have some translations of this couplet. So this one is by Augusto Savadini. I haven't encountered it in the internet. Mountain brightness, joyous bird's nature, marsh shadows, empty human heart. So another version, this by a 19th century translator, H.A. Giles. Around these hills, sweet birds their pleasure take, man's heart as free from shadow as this lake. This one by W. Binner. Here birds are alive with mountain light, and the mind of man touches peace in a pool. This one by W.J.B. Fletcher. Hark, the birds rejoicing in the mountain light, like one's dim reflection on a pool at night. Lo, the heart is melted, wavering out the sight. This one by R. Payne. The mountain colours have made the birds sing. The shadows in the pool empty the hearts of men. So, as you can see, you know, very ambiguous, very, very difficult to pinpoint the poem, to make a very clear translation of what is being said. So altogether, quite an effective poem. I think whatever literal meaning we attribute to some of its words or some of its lines, I think the overall idea of reaching a place where calmness of spirit and the proper mindset for achieving illumination is possible is you know, quite clearly viewed through any interpretation you might make of the different lines and images of this poem.